Hi everyone, Taylor from Doomed to Fail here. Today we are re-releasing episode 4, part 2. This is my favorite story. It is the story of Eleanor Roosevelt and her girlfriend Lorena Hickok. I know what you're thinking. Wait, what? Wasn't she married to FDR? She was. It's complicated. Love is complicated. It's a long story that I try to do a little bit of justice to in about a half hour. This is one that I've revisited a couple times. I really, really like this story. I have some recommended reading at the end and in the notes for you if you do want to learn more about Eleanor and Hick. But it's lovely, and tell your friends that you love them. I think that's something that we all could use kind of all the time right now. So um, I'll see you on the other side. Thanks.
In the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Fair enough.
So, okay, well, let's switch over to our historical story of a relationship that was doomed to fail. And as far as this is a love story. I texted you last night that I was crying and reading and drinking whiskey, and I was listening to the last book that I listened on this. I have this pile of books. This should be in our visual medium. I'll put this picture. I have this huge pile of books, these books that I've read kind of on these women in the story. And I finished the last one last night via audiobook while I was doing the laundry. And I just sat on my bed just like sobbing because it's just I feel very emotional towards these people. And so it's a love story. It's complicated. There's so much more that can be told than what I'm about to tell you right now, but I'm going to tell you sort of the cliff notes of this story, and I'm going to tell you the red flags right at the beginning, so that were telling us that this relationship was never going to last and never going to be a forever relationship. So the two biggest red flags is one person in the relationship is the wife of the president of the United States. She's the first lady, and the other person is the woman reporter assigned to cover her. So it was never going to work out. They were, both women in the 1940s, and one of them was the first lady. So there
Wow.
was a lot of, probably not going to make it. But in the meantime, a lot of stuff happened.
Wow.
So a huge pile of books that's taken me years to read through. I want to read a couple, tell you what a couple of them are. There's No Ordinary Time by Doris Kearns Goodwin, who's my favorite historian. There's Eleanor Roosevelt, volumes 1 through 3 by Blanche Wiesen Cook. There's Eleanor and Hick by Susan Quinn, Eleanor and Franklin by Joe Lash, and then Eleanor's book herself, This I Remember, that she wrote in 1945. And I wanted to do a shout out to Aaron Montijo at Diamond Sutra Books in Las Vegas. He's been a friend of mine since eighth grade, and he owns a bookstore in the District in Las Vegas. And he found me a first edition of Eleanor's book. So
That's
it's really
incredible.
beautiful. And I'm super excited that I have it. It's very special. So thank you, Aaron. And if you're in Las Vegas, go to Diamond Sutra Books. It's in the Arts District. So there are thousands of books written about the Roosevelts, talking Franklin Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt, 1940s, World War II America. It's the New Deal. There's thousands of letters that Eleanor wrote. She would write constantly, be writing letters to people. She also wrote tons of articles, tons of books. So this is just like a tiny piece in the Roosevelts puzzle of this story. I'm also already like pre-upset that I'm not going to get to every detail and I'm going to miss things in this story. So I just want to encourage people to DM me at Doomed to Fail Pod on Instagram and tell me what I missed, and I want to talk more about it. And I'm also not a queer historian. Like I don't, this isn't, and I'm not a historian. This isn't my expertise at all. So I also want to make sure, like, I'm happy that your story was in England. I want to, diversify, go all over the world, and I don't want to talk about white people. So definitely let me know if you have any other ideas, you, Fars, and the world. So I'd love to learn a little bit more and have some suggestions on other relationships I could cover.
Taylor, can I interrupt real quick?
Uh-huh. Please do.
I've known you a very long time, and the story you're going to tell us about Eleanor Roosevelt feels like it has been on your mind a very, very long time.
Hmm.
And I'm curious why that is, or if the story you're about to tell is going to highlight that for us anyways, then we can just forget this part and move on. But it's been living in your head for so long.
I know. No, you're totally right. Like I'm looking around, I'm like, oh, I have a painting of Eleanor on my wall. I definitely like I've read all these books about her. I feel very like just continue to be interested with her. I would read all those books again. I was reading Doris Kearns Goodwin because she is a really good, historian. She wrote the Team of Rivals, the Abraham Lincoln one that everybody knows about. She wrote a really great one on leadership in turbulent times about like Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson. And I like her books a lot. And so I was reading those, and then I read No Ordinary Time about Eleanor and Franklin. And then I was at my in-laws' house and I found Eleanor Roosevelt Volume One. And that is what actually our friend Lindsay told me to read because she knew I was reading another one about Eleanor. So I found that, and I've been kind of like working my way through that three-volume set. And it's just like, I'll talk a little bit about her life, but it's just, and this is also something that I read in another book, oh my God, about Winston Churchill. I've just decided to become a historian in the past couple of years. I don't know. It was a pandemic. I had nothing to do. So, I mean, I had a lot to do, but I decided to also do this. And there's a book about Winston Churchill, and the way that that book opens is like, I'm interested in people who live a full life, like people who
Mm,
really fucking just live the shit out of their lives. And they took opportunities and there were ups and downs, but you can really look at their story and be like, yeah, they fucking lived their whole life and they lived the shit out of it. So I think that Eleanor definitely did that, and that I think is really fascinating and something that like I don't want to be like step by step in everything that she did, but I think that the idea of like living your life to the fullest is really powerful because a lot of people feel like they're not. Does that
I
make
love that.
sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Oh, okay. I have a box of tissues. I'm already going to cry. This makes no sense. So, the relationship between Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt is complicated. It had many twists and turns, but there was lots of hurt and lots of love, lots of respect, and they are, an inescapable teamwork between the two of them. So there's definitely that between the two. Some characters I want you to remember that kind of romantic characters are going to come in and out of their lives. For Franklin, remember Lucy Mercer and Missy LeHand. And then for Eleanor, remember Joseph Lash, Earl Miller, Dr. David Gurewitch. I know I was going to get it wrong. Dr. David Gurewitch. And then the person we're talking about today, writer Lorena Hickok. So we're going to talk about Eleanor and Hick. That's our couple that was doomed to fail. And start with Hick. She was born on March 7th, 1893 in East Troy, Wisconsin. So terrible place to be born, terrible time to grow up. She was poor. She had a very hard Midwestern life. Her father was an abusive alcoholic. She left home at a young age to work as a maid. So very young, like 13, 14, working in other people's homes. She didn't really get a chance to go to school. Eventually, a relative in Chicago was able to take her in and allowed her to get an education. And so she began writing as like a girl reporter in like Minneapolis, in Wisconsin, in like the Midwest. And it was a time when like women were given the tell me about the biggest pumpkin in town stories. Like it wasn't like a woman was a hard-hitting reporter, but Hick was a hard-hitting woman. And she um, wanted to, move up and do other things and really move forward with her writing. And she was very talented. So Hick was also a lesbian. She had an 8-year relationship with a woman named Ella Morse, a fellow reporter. By all accounts, they were very happy. Hick was diagnosed with diabetes in her 30s, and Ella took time off to take care of her. But then, unexpectedly, Ella met a man that she had once known and left Hick to marry him and start a family. So that sucks. Hick was devastated. Obviously they lived like together as like companions and friends because it was the 30s and 40s, but
Yeah.
she did, have a long-term relationship. And she moved to New York because she wanted to kind of get away from the memories of Ella and what they had together. So in 1932, where our story starts, Hick is the most popular women reporter in the country. She was the first woman to have a byline in the New York Times, and she calls herself, well, I said this already, but she called herself, quote, the top gal reporter in the country. So,
That's awesome.
yeah, so she
Good
was
for
really
her.
like top of her game. Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
breaking down barriers.
Yeah. And so if you want to picture her, she's stocky, she's a little bit, she's kind of short, kind of stocky. She's smoking constantly and she's drinking and telling stories. She just sounds like a blast. So she had this hard life. Now she's in New York. She's an Associated Press reporter. Things are going really well for her. So we have Hick. It's 1932. Let's go back
Taylor,
to Eleanor. What?
I just Googled Eleanor Roosevelt and Lorena Hickok to get a picture
Good.
of
Yeah.
what she looks like. And the very first thing that came up was a it's incredible. It's a book that's entitled Empty Without You.
Mm.
I can see why this hits you.
And everyone, I mean, it's like a heartstring story. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely. But so now you see their pictures. Like Eleanor's tall and Hick is like a lot shorter than her.
Yep.
So you can kind of see them together. Yeah. And so Eleanor Roosevelt was born Anna Eleanor Roosevelt on October 11th, 1884. So she's 9 years older than Hick. She was born to a rich family. Her mother wasn't very nice to her, but she adored her father. Unfortunately, her father was a severe alcoholic and he passed away when she was young. So that's something that they actually have in common, losing their parents when they're young. Eleanor's mother died pretty quickly after that. So she was raised by family and sent to London to study at Allenswood Academy, which was a girls' school in London in that time. And if you look it up, it's like this beautiful old building, and they knocked it down to make projects, which is gross. So like, great job, London. But it was run by a woman named Marie Servest, and she was from France and she was very forward thinking, and she was also a lesbian. So Eleanor would travel with Madame Servest all over Europe. And there was another book that came out later that another student wrote about like actually being madly in love with this teacher and with this headmaster of the school. So Eleanor was around lesbians and like knew about these relationships from, in her teens, which I think is interesting because it was like the 20s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would imagine in any culture, I would imagine that there's a the ability if you want to learn to go and find out about stuff like that.
Right. You're right. There's always been gay people. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally positive around. Absolutely. Totally right. So Eleanor, has a great time there, and then she comes back to New York to like have her coming out party. She's obviously from a rich family because she was a Roosevelt, and she ends up marrying Franklin Roosevelt, who was her father's fifth cousin. So they're like practically strangers. They're not related. They're from different branches of the Roosevelt family. They just happen to have the same last name.
Right.
Yeah, her uncle is Teddy Roosevelt. So her dad was
Okay.
Teddy Roosevelt's brother, and TR does give her away at her wedding because her dad had already passed. So she is close to him. So she's already like been to the White House, and like been around the presidency because her uncle was president.
Right.
So she's married to Franklin. He's also just kind of like a rich kid. I wish I could do like an accent that they can do, but they're just like, rich kids from upstate New York. And Eleanor spent her 20s having babies. She has six children. One died as an infant, and she was a terrible mother, which I also think is interesting because like when I'm reading about like first ladies and women who are really successful, there's always something that gives. And like Eleanor Roosevelt was just not a good mom. She didn't really care.
Makes her human. I mean, everything else
Yeah.
she said, she sounds incredibly privileged, and it's like, okay, well, you got a flaw somewhere.
Yeah. And I think it's because she had no examples because like her mom was very mean to her. But she would do things like if her daughter was crying, she'd just like put her outside on the terrace in New York City, like whatever. And then the neighbors would complain. She'd be like, oh, I thought she needed light. Like, I don't know. I don't know what to do with this child. So she had a pretty bad relationship with her kids their whole lives. And some of her sons, did go to World War II, but they all came back. But her kids had like also terrible relationships. So of her five children, there were like 15 marriages among them. They all got married
Wow.
like a ton of times. So she was always like a little disappointed in that, but she was never really that close to them. Um, okay. That was an I apologize for it. I think I'm doing okay. Let me know.
You're
Make
doing
like
great.
jazz hands if I start doing too many ums. I can see you. So, okay. So now we're in 1913. Franklin is Assistant Secretary of the Navy, which is a job that TR had as well. And they lived in DC. And a woman named Lucy Mercer, who we heard about before, was one of Eleanor's secretaries. And her and Franklin had an affair. There was like a little bit of like flirtation between them. And then Eleanor found some love letters and that confirmed it. And she was obviously devastated and thought her marriage was over. But her mother-in-law and FDR convinced her that they could work through it, and they would be able to um, be okay. I said so this is when it's 1921, and the big thing happens to FDR. Can you think of the big thing that might have happened to FDR when he was younger, like in his 30s?
Yeah, he was stricken by is polio, right?
Right. Correct. Yep. And In 1921, they're at Campobello, which is a house that they have in Canada. They have a bunch of like vacation houses. And he goes swimming one night with the kids, comes home, wakes up, says, I have some chills, and then he never walks again. He got polio somehow from swimming. I don't know, I didn't look that up, but that's the kind of the story that happens. And another question that I have for you, Faraz, as a Texan, did you know that Greg Abbott is in a wheelchair?
Yeah.
I didn't know that until very recently. And I thought that was interesting because both my husband and my father-in-law we were talking about Franklin Roosevelt over Christmas, of course, and they were like, "You couldn't be president in a wheelchair today." They both said the same thing, but I'm like, "Yeah, you could." Greg Abbott is doing tons of damage and being such a dick from a wheelchair, you know? Like I don't think that that really matters. Like I didn't know for a long time until I saw a picture of him, but it wasn't like the lead in his story. So I don't think it would be
No.
for anyone now.
Well, I would say that from what I can gather from seeing, news articles about him, they kind of make it a point to not show the
Yeah.
wheelchair as much as they possibly can. Apparently, it was a pretty traumatic thing. It wasn't like he was born
No, it was a
without
car accident, right? Oh no, a tree fell on him when he was jogging.
yeah, a tree fell on him when he was jogging.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting that you can still, be in American politics and be in a wheelchair these days. It's not like a deal breaker. Like I feel like we're told it was a deal breaker when we were little, or they say
Yeah,
that of the
well,
American president or something. Yeah.
the way that they constantly hid Roosevelt,
Right.
so nobody could see that he was in a wheelchair, which is very, very.
Totally.
I don't think that'd be a thing anymore, thankfully.
Hmm. Yeah, they're not like propping him up against other people, like having him pretend to walk around. Yeah.
Right.
We definitely did that with Franklin for sure. So this was like obviously devastating, and some people wanted him to just like retire and like become, just like live with his family forever. He really wanted to continue to be in politics. So for about 9 years, Eleanor was his eyes and ears around the country. She would travel, she would tell him what was going on in the state and in the country. She would meet people. She worked really close with his advisor Louis Howe, and kept the Roosevelt name out there. And this was really cool for her. She hadn't lived her own life for so long. She had just been a mom and had a bunch of babies, and her mother-in-law was very controlling. She was under Franklin's shadow, but now she was the one who had to be out there because Franklin physically couldn't be. He spent time in Warm Springs, Georgia, where he had a spa, like healing waters that he had purchased and made for people who were afflicted and trying to like get himself better. But while he was doing that, Eleanor was the one who was out there really doing things like writing and talking to people. And so I think that like the affair and the polio gave her two big things that really changed her life. It gave her a pass to have very deep emotional relationships with a lot of people. So now she was like, oh, I can go and have my own relationships and like live my own
Yeah.
life. And then it also gave her a sense of non-permanence for relationships, like for marriage, for other relationships. So she did some weird things where she like held on too tight and put herself in relationships where she didn't belong, because I don't think that like sanctity of a permanent relationship meant anything as much as it did before to her. And Susan Quinn in Eleanor and Hick, she describes Eleanor's relationships as triangular. There's always someone else involved. It was always like a wife or a partner or like something. She's always kind of
And
like in other people's things,
and
business.
Franklin's affair was the trigger for
I think
that.
so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the polio, because the polio made her kind of be able to step up and do things
Yep.
that she wasn't able to do before. And she felt the freedom to do it because she was like, well, now I can do whatever I want, which
Right.
is exciting for her and kind of lets her go and do her own things. So she starts a school in New York City. She's like the vice principal and teaches there with some of her friends. She starts a furniture company up in Hyde Park with her friends Nancy Cook and Marion Dickerman, which is another lesbian couple that she was close with. So they lived on their property in Hyde Park and had a furniture factory for decades. So there's a lot of photos of her with them. And so she was really like she would have an apartment in New York City where she would go to like to the village and hang out with the gays, things like that. So she was definitely like still in that community. And
That had to be so
Franklin,
fun.
oh my God, it's so fun. Back to the smoking. I mean, Eleanor didn't like to smoke or drink because she had that alcoholism in her family and all of that, which is why she would lock the cabinet and not want her husband to drink during Prohibition. But still sounds real fun.
Yeah, because that was pre Stonewall.
Hmm.
So a lot of the interactions had this kind of like naughty quality to it because you had to be in private. It was like
Yeah.
speakeasies and like getting together at friends' houses because you weren't allowed to congregate legally.
Yeah. Hmm.
Kind of wild.
We talked about speakeasies last time too. I love it. I love it. I love
Yep.
it. I know they're played out, but I love them. And so FDR is elected president in 1932, blah, blah, blah. A whole bunch of stuff happened to get him there, but he's president. Do you know how many times he was president first?
He was three. He got elected three times and died halfway through his third term, and that's when Truman took over. Is that right?
Close. It's four times.
Damn. Was I right about
Yeah.
Truman?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. When this is not in my notes, but when FDR died, Eleanor was the one to tell Truman, and Truman said, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And she said, "Oh no, no. Is there anything I can do for you? You're the one who's in trouble now."
Yeah. Yeah. Bad time
Um,
to be an incoming president.
yeah, he didn't even make it a year into his fourth term. But after that, they did make it a rule. The two-term rule was more of a guideline after Washington had, resigned after two terms, but it's an official rule now. But the America, wanted Franklin Roosevelt to get them through that war. So it was a
Because
lot. And
he,
there's so much. Yeah.
yeah, because he got them through. If I remember my American history right, Herbert Hoover was president during the Great Depression, and he
Hmm.
basically didn't do jack shit. And
Right.
then Franklin that's the position on which Franklin Roosevelt got elected. Right? Was I'm gonna
Hmm.
fix the economy. He started all these different associations and organizations that could hire people for day labor work and stuff like that.
Yep.
And yeah, it got America out of the Great Depression.
Yep. Exactly. That was the New Deal. A lot of like social programs, let's
Yep.
build all these big roads, build all these big post offices, just like get people back to work. And also this is not in my notes, just a thing that I happen to know, is like this is the time when like he really wanted like universal health care. His administration is responsible for unemployment benefits and social security and things like that that America didn't have before this. So really trying to like make sure that people were supported by the government.
Very
So
cool.
okay, so it's his first term as 1932, and this is like the shortest I can make this. And Hick is assigned to Eleanor as her like AP reporter. So it's 1932. Hick is at the top of her game. She's like the best gal reporter in the country. She's assigned to Eleanor. She's 39 years old, and she's not even going to make it a year before she leaves her job. So she's top of her game. She doesn't even make it to the summer of 1933. She has to quit because she's so close to Eleanor. So it probably starts in a train car on the campaign trail. They kind of were avoiding each other. They like didn't, Eleanor was like, oh, another reporter who's like following me around. And then there was an instance where one reporter named John got invited to a Roosevelt family party, and Hick was like, "That's weird. I want to go too." And Eleanor let her come, and happened to be because John was having an affair with Eleanor's daughter Anna. Like the kids had terrible relationships too, but they started to become friends, and they spent this overnight ride in a train car where they told each other their life stories, and they had so much in common. Like they didn't have parents who were there for them, and they felt inadequate, and all these things. Even though they were totally different socioeconomic points, they still felt, very, very um, very similar. So one thing that I find, like one story that I think is hilarious is in her book, in this I remember, Eleanor says, Hick interviewed her the night of the inauguration, and so many people were trying to interrupt them that they had to finish the interview in the bathroom of the hotel they were staying in DC. And it was innocent enough. And, in Eleanor's story, she brings that up. But I read another book that was like they were already in love at this point, and it was inauguration night, and Eleanor was overwhelmed. She didn't know if she wanted to be a first lady, and her and Hick kind of escaped into the bathroom. And I imagine that this is like it's cold outside. When you're in DC, the heater is like hissing, so it's like
Yeah.
hissing from the heater. It's cold outside. They're sitting on the cold tile floor, and they're just like they have each other during this really crazy time. So it actually feels much more romantic than obviously than Eleanor said in her book, but it's a time when they really like were together and really needed each other. And Hick helped AR's career. She encouraged her to host press conferences for just women, and she also wrote to they wrote letters every day, like 10-page letters to each other every day when they were apart, which is crazy. And Hicks said, you should tell people what's going on in your letters. So Eleanor created a newspaper column called My Day, where every single day for decades, she would write a couple paragraphs about what she did, and it would be published in a bunch of different newspapers, which is pretty cool. Hick was responsible for that. So these are all these letters. So we're going to go out of the timeline and think about these like love letters. So they're literally, written on paper. There's thousands of pages of love letters. Hick burned some of the more intimate ones after Eleanor died, which is a bummer. So we don't have those. And then she kind of gave up because it was like a big task. So she gave them to the museum in Hyde Park and said, "Don't open these until 10 years after I die."
Wow.
So she just like wanted them to remain kind of like a secret.
Yeah, that's
And yeah.
part of what I saw here when I was trying to find this picture and found this incredibly touching title of this book called Empty Without You,
Hmm.
was that I was looking at when Hicks died and looking at when all these rumors started coming up, and I was like, wow, that's weird. 10 years, huh? That's how long it took for people to start caring about this. It makes sense now.
Yes. Oh, exactly. That's a good job. That's exactly why, because they weren't allowed to open them. I mean, they could do whatever they want, whatever, but they respected her wishes and didn't do that. So unfortunately, this prude of an author named Doris Farber, who wrote Hick's biography, is the one who opened them first, and she sucks. And she immediately wanted to put them away. It was like the 80s, and she was like, "Nope, no." And she said, quote, "How could any reasonably perceptive adult deny that these were love letters?" So she was like floored that like Eleanor Roosevelt would have like a physical lesbian relationship with another woman while she was first lady, and she wanted them put away. She asked them to put them back for a couple more decades. And she also tries to get around it by saying, in Victorian times, people sent more love letters to platonic friends. So you maybe had more flowery language, which I think is great. We should bring that back. There's some letters from Teddy Roosevelt and Taft where they're like, "You are the best. I'm so excited that we're friends." That's great. We should
Yeah,
do more of that.
I'm into
But
it.
yeah, and there's more also like, how people are like, Abe Lincoln's gay because he slept with dudes in the same bed. Do you remember those rumors?
I've never heard that.
So there's like in like some of his memoirs, he's like, "Oh well, I was traveling around Illinois as a circuit lawyer, and my buddy Jeff, who's also a lawyer, we shared a room, blah blah blah." But that was just like what you did then because rooms were expensive. And I think the actual scandal there is how gross that must have been.
Yeah,
That was not like clean sheets. That was very stinky and very
all I
gross.
know is what I learned about Abraham Lincoln in that Vampire Slayer movie. Do you remember
Oh my God, I watched half of it like semi recently, and I was like, even I can't finish this.
that? It was so fun. I loved it.
Maybe I'll pick it up again, but I was like, absolutely not. So who knows? Like yes, people wrote more flowery letters, but let me read you some of these letters. As far as so, Eleanor wore a ring that Hick gave her to the first inauguration of FDR. So this is like a few months into the relationship, and she wrote to Hick, quote, "Hick, darling, I want to put my arms around you to hold you close. Your ring is a great comfort. I look at it and I think she does love me." And then she says, "You have grown so much to be a part of my life that it is empty without you. Even though I'm busy every minute, my love enfolds thee all night through." I mean,
It's incredible.
those are love letters.
That's where that name comes from, Empty Without You.
Yeah. And one from Hick, this one's my favorite. So Hick wrote that she is trying to remember Eleanor's face when they're apart. And she says, "Most clearly, I remember your eyes with a kind of teasing smile in them and the feeling of that soft spot just northeast of the corner of your mouth against my lips." So I think it's Blanche Wiesen-Cook in her book where she wrote, "Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, but the northeast corner of your mouth is always the northeast corner of your mouth." So like
I love that.
they definitely, were physical with each other. They traveled a lot in search of time alone. They drive through towns by themselves and refuse Secret Service help. And Eleanor freely writes about them camping together and sharing rooms at friends' houses. They did some, domestic work together. They went to Puerto Rico to look at the slums. It was like, and some of her pet projects sort of help people. There was a project that Eleanor did called Arthurdale, where she, gave people houses and job training to try to get them to, live better lives in like the coal mining towns. So a lot of like social services things that they did. And tons of my darlings, I miss you and I love yous on the side. They dreamed about growing old together. Like, I can't wait until we have a house together and we can just live there until we're old, things like that.
Oh,
They were lovely, lovely
yeah.
love letters. And at this time, it was getting really hard for obviously Hick is not a cannot be an unbiased reporter anymore. So she leaves her job and starts to get jobs sort of in the government that Eleanor hooks up for her. She's able to have. I also read on Wikipedia when I was just like scanning it for dates. Did you ever see the J. Edgar movie with Leonardo DiCaprio?
Yes.
I remember. I don't remember. It was a long time ago when I saw it, but it did say in Wikipedia that that movie alludes that J. Edgar had proof that Eleanor was having this lesbian affair and he threatened to expose her. But in
I
the end,
don't
didn't.
See, I don't remember that.
I don't either, but that it was said it was alluded to in the movie, but I don't know if I want to watch it again because I feel like it was also pretty intense, right?
I remember it. I definitely didn't walk away from it thinking better of J. Edgar Hoover.
No, I mean, of all people, he obviously had secrets himself, you
Ex
know?
of all people, yes.
Yeah. Like great. You're gonna be the one to be like, this is exposable, but whatever, he didn't. And so Hick was, Hick worked for the World's Fair, she worked for the DNC, she traveled around, reported back to Eleanor, kind of became her eyes and ears, and eventually she moves into the White House. And I have, oh gosh, where do I have? Somewhere in one of these books, I have a map, like a floor plan of the White House at that time. And so the way that it was is the residence floor of the White House, Eleanor and Franklin had different rooms that were side by side, and then across a like a sitting room from Eleanor's room was the Lincoln bedroom, which is like the famous bedroom because Lincoln has a long bed there or whatever. And on the side of the Lincoln bedroom is a small room, and that was Hick's room, and she lived there for years. So they were
Wow.
steps away from each other in the White House.
Is that's not normal for, is that
No,
normal?
no.
Yeah, okay.
So the Roosevelts had a lot of like friends that would stop by and stay there who were like, who would work there, and they was people would stay for a while. There were always guests, it was never like an empty place. But, having Hick live there for so long, and also they kept it a secret. So Hick would literally like if someone took her out to dinner, they'd bring her back to the Mayflower Hotel and she would sneak out the back and take a cab to the White House. So
Oh, that's so interesting.
she wasn't telling people that she was living there, but she was living there, which I think is really, this is a sad life of Lorena Hickok because she, was just wanted to be close to Eleanor in any way possible.
I'm looking at the Mayflower to see where it is in proximity to the White House.
Oh my God, thank you.
So it is, I mean, it's not an inconsequential distance away. But I guess if you're trying to maintain that level of secret, you kind of go to whatever lengths you have to. It's
Yeah.
kind of like I've walked this. I mean, yeah, like she could have gotten dropped off way closer. There's places that, well, it was a long time ago, so maybe not, but maybe this was the closest place she could have gotten dropped off at. So
Yeah, maybe.
makes sense.
But yeah, you're right. She had to like pay for a cab to take her there. It wasn't like free. It's like walk
Yeah,
across the street. Yeah, so I think that's more, I think, more evidence that, it was kind of a clandestine thing that they were doing and they were sharing. So eventually, when things got really busy, Eleanor was so beloved and so needed, and it was World War II. Like they really needed her out, like in the world. She was really working hard to get the United Nations started, and she often had to break plans with Hick, and Hick was getting sicker with her diabetes, and they kept disappointing each other.
yeah,
Being like, I wish I could be here with you. I can't. Like, I have to. Like, I'm sick. I have a job. I have to do this, and they just kept missing each other in this time. And so, unfortunately, Hick is just like, I can't do this anymore. And she moves to a small house on Long Island that she lives in until she can no longer afford it years later. And then after that, Eleanor helps her get a place near her in Hyde Park. So she always lives near her. It's like she was never out of reach. Even after the affair maybe had
yeah.
cooled, she was never out of reach. And they both had other relationships. Hick tried to make it work with other women. Eleanor had, like I said before, a disposition to like kind of be involved in other people's relationships in like a suspicious way. She would meet like younger men at like I don't know. I feel like I said that and it sounded weirder than I actually think it is. But she would like go to like a youth conference and she met this man, Joseph Lash. She wrote this long book about her and became a lifelong friend. But they were like very close. So it was a little bit like her sons were kind of sucked. So she needed like a son figure, but also it was a little bit like flirtatious.
Yeah,
And she was like
I get
getting
it.
older. Yeah. And she also had a bodyguard named Earl Miller. And they would do things like put on plays at the White House. And like there's like a video that they have of them doing like a pirate show where he's a pirate and he like kidnaps her and he picks her up and he's like carrying her around the White House. And so there were a lot of rumors that they were having an affair. And Earl Miller said he got married at least twice to kind of start to quell those rumors. And his third divorce, the wife threatened to name Eleanor Roosevelt in the divorce proceedings, but ended up not doing it.
Oh
So
wow.
it was
So
like either like, yeah,
she played a significant role there.
yeah, for sure. Like if you're causing your friend to have three divorces, because his
Yeah.
wives are sick of you guys hanging out, then like that's the thing also.
Yeah, totally.
So she was in and out of those things. In the end, her one of her last relationships is with a man named Dr. David Gvarevich. He, was a lot younger than her, and then he met someone, and when he met someone, Eleanor was devastated, but ended up like letting them get married in her apartment and like traveling the world with them. So she just like didn't want to leave him alone, which is like kind of weird. So to
He's got
explore in different times.
he's got to pull the ripcord. That's on him.
Yes. Totally. Totally. So she just needed to be a part of relationships in any kind of way. Franklin also had other relationships, so he's still here, as president. His secretary, Missy LeHand, who's one of the people I mentioned earlier, she devoted her goddamn life to him. She gave him everything. She was always with him. There's a couple, like the Hyde Park movie with Bill Murray. Have you seen that
No.
movie? So there's a movie where Bill Murray plays FDR, and they do the weekend where the King and Queen of England come to Hyde Park to meet with him, and they in that movie they flat out say that he was having an affair with like another cousin of his and Missy LeHand, his secretary. The weird thing that I think is also kind of interesting about the way that the Roosevelts think about relationships is that Missy LeHand was fucking devoted to Franklin. She was always with him. She helped him with everything. And when she had a heart attack or a stroke, went to the hospital, he never visited her. And when she died, he didn't go to her funeral.
Oh wow.
So he just like forgot about her in like that fleeting relationship kind of way, which I think is really sad, and her life is sad. But like we said before, Franklin was president 4 times. He died during his fourth term, pretty early into his fourth term. He was in Warm Springs, Georgia. And guess who he was with when he died?
Eleanor?
No, he was with Lucy Mercer, the woman that he had
Uh,
the affair with 20 years ago, like
oh
20 to 30
wow.
years ago, that started the whole thing. They had started to see each other again, and Eleanor's daughter Anna had kind of helped arrange that because they loved each other. And Anna saw that Lucy made her dad happy when her dad was like super stressed out, and her mom never made him happy that way. They
Wow.
hadn't in a long time. Even though the Roosevelts loved each other, they still didn't have that like it just was, different. So after FDR dies, Eleanor is, out on her own. Hick writes some books for young adults. She wrote a book on Helen Keller, and Eleanor actually arranged for her to meet Helen Keller. So that book is like still up there and like, was pretty popular. Eleanor was in her late 60s and early 70s, and she was still traveling the world. So she was working for the United Nations under Truman, and then Eisenhower took away her actual job with the UN, but she volunteered with it after that. And so she went everywhere. She went to Russia, the Middle East, Asia, just all over the world into her 70s. And she would visit Hick in her small apartment in Hyde Park near the Roosevelt home from time to time. And Hick was very sick with her diabetes. She had arthritis. She couldn't see very well. So she really couldn't go anywhere. She just kind of stayed like near Eleanor's home for the end.
Yeah.
And eventually Eleanor got sick with tuberculosis. One fun thing is in the hospital, she was like, okay, I'm ready to die. And the nurse said, you should wait until God is ready for you. And ER said, utter nonsense, which is a cute thing to say. And she ended up being able to go home, and she died in New York on November 7th, 1962, at the age of 78. Eleanor is buried with Franklin in Hyde Park. So obviously this was devastating for like a lot of people. She was like the first lady of the world. Everybody really loved her. Obviously Hick especially. And although she was very sick, she lived another 5 years. And during that 5 years, she did more writing and kind of put it around the town next to where Eleanor was buried. And during this time is when she curated her letters and donated them to the museum and all of those things. And Hick died on May 1st, 1968. In her will, she gave her favorite granddaughter of Eleanor's the royalties to her Helen Keller book, and they've amounted to like, over $80,000. So she was able to, finally give someone some money and earn some money from her writing. And she put in her will that she wanted to be cremated and have her ashes scattered by, a tree to help the trees grow. But her ashes went unclaimed, and they were buried in a mass unclaimed remains plot in the Rhinebeck Cemetery about 15 minutes from Hyde Park, which sucks. And
Yeah.
so later, after the letters came out and after people started learning more about Hick and Eleanor's relationship, ER's biographer and some other women would plant a tree in the cemetery, and put a little bench, and they made a little plaque. And the plaque says, I'm going to cry now. The plaque says, Lorena Hickok Hick, March 1893 to May 1968, East Troy, Wisconsin to Hyde Park, New York, AP reporter, author, activist, and friend of ER. And
Oh,
that's where her little pockets cemetery. And I'm crying because it's very passionate and interesting. And it's like I said before, like I think Eleanor had her full life, and I don't think that Hick did. And so that makes me really, really sad. This is the worst episode of a podcast ever. It was sad and it was traumatizing, and I'm sorry to everyone.
no, I think it's hitting for me so many feelings, if
Hmm.
I'm being honest. I've the impetus for this podcast, which I don't know if we've even discussed here, was a relationship that I was in that was very, I'm going to describe as soulful, that was obviously going to, it had to end.
Yeah.
And there's a quality to your story that really hit home for
Hmm.
me when it comes to that, which is the universe putting two people together in
Hmm.
moments when they really, really, really need each other, knowing full well that those circumstances that also brought you together are the circumstances that are going to tear you apart,
Yeah, totally.
which is sad.
Yeah. Oh, it is sad, but I think it's sad and then it's hopeful because then you can live many lives and have many, just don't kill people. Just love a lot of people. And I feel like that, that's what Eleanor did. And Hick, I think, fortunately, unfortunately, she had her great love and it was Eleanor. So
Yeah.
that was kind of it for her. And I'm happy that we're telling her story in, many different books in many different ways because it's such an important part of history to be like, this relationship during this time. And, the Doris Kearns Goodwin book is called um it's called No Ordinary Time, and maybe because that's what we're talking about. Like this was a real special time in history and a real special like a relationship and thing for the entire world. And that during this time there was love as well. It's like I think really hopeful and sad and interesting. And next week I'm gonna do something horrible. I need to find something that is like very violent again. I'm gonna get more violence into mine.
You know what I was also thinking of was Diana,
Yeah.
because I mean obviously their husbands were dramatically different. Franklin was arguably the best president the US has
Hmm.
ever had. Charles was useless and didn't do anything. But like they both ended up in some ways becoming kind of the flag bearer for
Hmm.
their husbands and their countries. And
Hmm.
yeah, very interesting. Becoming their own
And
powerhouse independent of their husbands, essentially.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't feel like I'm gonna do Diana because she's been done to death. Part of the pun. But there's so many freaking things about her. Leave her alone.
I agree. I agree.
I'm gonna let her rest for a minute and a half. That poor lady.
Yeah. Um, cool. Well, thanks, Taylor. I am, I'm going to dwell on this. I'm actually leaving after this to drive to Dallas
Mhm.
for a family reunion. And there's going to be two things that you left me with. I'm legit going to be dwelling on the entire drive. One is the concept of living the shit out of your life,
Mhm.
which I think I've been sleepwalking through most of that for
Yeah.
a little bit, and I'm coming out of it. And this story really helped reinvigorate that piece. And the other is I'm never going to forget this title, Empty Without You, the intimate letters of Lorena Hickok and Eleanor Roosevelt.
I don't even
What
have that
a
book. I don't think I could handle it emotionally.
what a beautifully titled book.
Hmm.
And when you read that quote, I was like, ah, they talk to each other like this. That's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
Um,
It's so beautiful and so lovely. And
I,
I'll write you a really nice letter later today that tells you that you're the best.
I appreciate that. You are not going to like this because I know
No,
you well enough to know that you are not a huge fan of Ronald Reagan, but I
who
did go to
is?
Reagan's presidential museum when I was living in LA.
That's cool.
His love letters to Nancy were like this. They were
Are they really?
incredible, and they're all over the place. You just go around and read them because he was always on the move,
Hmm.
doing his thing. But he wrote incredible letters to his wife, and
It's
they're
cool.
definitely worth a read.
I definitely
So
want to go. I want to go to all of the presidential museums. His has an Air Force One too, right?
yeah, but
Isn't that a
it's like the
plane?
old.
No,
It's
no, I know. But
Yeah,
is
yeah.
it cool?
It's not the 747. Oh, it's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
they have Air Force One, they have Marine One. You walk into this giant hangar that has a cafe, and
Dope.
I'm trying to remember what city it's in California. I can't remember. Wherever it is though, it faces this bluff
Hmm.
that is stunning. You're in this hangar that's all glass, based like on the side of a
Cool.
cliff. It's absolutely fantastic.
I need to go. Nixon's library is also very close to here too, and I just find it delightful that Nixon's from Costa Mesa because I imagine him like with an umbrella and it's raining on just him because he's like from this beautiful place in California. He's just like, Meh. And also I'm going to New York in July and I will be 35 minutes from Hyde Park, so I will report back because I'm going to go visit that. I'm going to visit Lorena's plaque. I'm going to cry a lot. Um, I
That's
will share
awesome.
photos when I do that later.
Please
So
do.
cool. Well, thank you, Fars, for this. Have a safe trip to Dallas. While you're there, go to the JFK um, museum about the assassination. There's a place where you can go and stand at the window that Lee Harvey
Oh
Oswald was
yeah.
at. You can do that. And I want to remind everyone to like and subscribe on all the things. Find us at Doomed to Fail Pod on Facebook and Instagram, and keep listening. Thank you.
Keep listening. We'll leave you with
Thank you,
keep
Fars.
listening. Thanks,
I'm gonna,
Taylor.
I'll be funnier. I keep saying that. I don't get funnier. I'm gonna go cry. I'm gonna weep. I'll talk to you later.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.
Hello, Taylor again. I hope you enjoyed the re-release. I was literally listening to this on a plane the other day, like listening to my own podcast, and I made myself cry. It could have been all the Dramamine and the wine, but also it's emotional. And I hope that you liked it. I'd love to hear if you have any other stories that you think we should cover. Please send us an email at doomtofailpod@gmail.com, or if you have any feedback or questions. And then just a reminder, we are re-releasing our first 26 episodes in half episodes. So that's what we're doing today because we used to do two stories at a time, but they were getting really long. So that's what this is. But if you do want to go back and listen to our first 26 or so episodes, you absolutely can. They are in all of their long form glory on our archives and on, that means iTunes, Spotify, Pocket Casts, YouTube, wherever you listen. And then we'll release one a week as well for you to revisit. So let us know if you need anything. We're at Doom to Fill Pod everywhere. Thanks again.